Someone call the Undertaker. Much obliged.
Hey guys, Toast here. McCree has been a bit of a controversial character in Overwatch from the start. During the closed beta phases, McCree was a character that was chosen quite frequently, and among competitive and competition matches he was almost sure to find a home in just about every one. Upon release of the game, many players flocked to him because of his extremely high damage at close range, capable of taking down just about anyone who got close. Whether offense, defense, support, or tank, if you were within the range of his flashbang, your chances of making it out alive were slim to none. Even the heftiest characters like Roadhog or those with the most innate damage mitigation like D.Va oftentimes stood little to no chance against a capable McCree who knew how to properly use his abilities to gain the most damage possible quickly. Blizzard took note of this, and in the June 13, 2016 patch, they dropped a big nerf on McCree's close range damage, bringing it from 70 damage per bullet down to 45 damage per bullet while using Fan the Hammer. Since Fan the Hammer is capable of shooting 6 shots, that meant that at close range you went from being capable of dealing 420 damage, which was enough to take down every enemy in the game with one Fan the Hammer excluding Roadhog, Reinhardt, D.Va, and Winston, down to now 270 damage, which meant that certain defense characters like Bastion and Torbjorn, if he had his additional armor, were able to survive. Now, it may seem like Fan the Hammer still does a lot of damage, and honestly, it does, but you have to take into consideration that the numbers I just listed are best case scenarios, assuming the enemy is in close range and you manage to hit every shot in Fan the Hammer. Unless you're playing at a fairly competitive level or the enemy is literally toe-to-toe with you, you're less likely to hit every shot in Fan the Hammer every time. This isn't necessarily due to bad aim, as many characters use Fan the Hammer directly following Flashbang when the enemy's not moving, but take into consideration that the effects of Flashbang didn't last long enough to allow most players to get off all 6 shots from Fan the Hammer. Let's say that you only hit 4 out of 6 shots, which I would say is a reasonable number of shots to hit for many players on average. You would be looking at 280 damage prior to this patch, which is still 10 damage more than you could do by hitting all 6 shots currently. In its current state, you would do 180 damage, which isn't even enough to take out most offense or defense characters in the game. Now, to counterbalance this damage reduction, Blizzard also reduced the recovery time, which is the time between the release of his last shot and the beginning of his reload, from 0.75 seconds to 0.3 seconds. This 0.4 of a second difference was actually quite noticeable in playing him, and left him vulnerable for less time after using Fan the Hammer. Blizzard's reasoning for this patch in their own words was, quote, "McCree was performing too well against all targets, making him feel like a must-pick in many situations. By reducing the damage of his alternate fire, McCree is now significantly weaker against tanks like Roadhog and Reinhardt, but still maintains his lethality against smaller targets like Tracer and Genji," unquote. Now, I did notice in the rounds that I played that McCree, while still there, was much less frequently chosen overall than he had been previously, but it seemed like it got to the point where I would encounter him very rarely, as there were other characters who seemed far better choices in most situations. Fast forward about a month, and McCree was having difficulty standing up to many characters, as not only was he much less effective at close range, he also wasn't much to write home about at long range either, as his damage drop-off was fairly steep. In swooped Blizzard again to try and fix the problem. Instead of altering McCree's damage again, they instead decided to change his effective range. In the July 19, 2016 patch, they increased the effective range of his primary attack, making him more capable of holding his own in longer range engagements. Blizzard went on to say that, quote, "While the game does feel better following the nerf to McCree's close range damage in the previous patch, it left him a little too weak. So we're increasing his effective distance, making his range similar to Soldier 76's. This should hopefully give players another option for dealing with pesky long-range damage-dealing heroes like Pharah and Hanzo," unquote. McCree was now a significantly greater threat at mid to long range. Again, I started to see him more prevalent in hero choices in many matches, and it seemed like he was moving into a stronger position in the game meta, though not quite as dominant as he originally was. It seemed that many, myself included, were fairly content with where he was at that point. However, on July 26, 2016, Blizzard made even more changes to McCree. This time around, they chose to partially undo what they had done previously on pretty much all accounts. The first thing they did was decrease his fall-off range by 10 meters, making him less effective yet again at longer ranges. Still not quite as ineffective as he was at launch, but enough to be noticeable. To counterbalance this, they again buffed his Fan the Hammer, though instead of choosing to buff his damage, they instead chose to do it through rate of fire and recovery time. They increased the rate of fire for Fan the Hammer by 15% to allow players to get all 6 shots off during the effective period of Flashbang, and, as an added bonus, they decreased the recovery time of Flashbang, which is essentially the amount of time from when the ability is used to when McCree can begin to fire again, from 0.5 seconds down to 0.35 seconds. Now, as of the time of this video, this is where McCree currently stands, and I personally like the heavier focus on close range combat, as this is where McCree initially excelled, and in my humble opinion, where he should excel. But that said, what do you think of where McCree sits in his current iteration? Do you feel like Blizzard has finally gotten the balance right for him, or do you feel like he still should be altered in some way, and if you do feel that way, how do you think he should be altered? If you liked the video, please leave a like, and if you want to see more content, please subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Toast, and I'll talk to you soon.